George Washington is the only president who never serves in Washington.
George Washington defined the presidency, but it defined him as well, especially in times of crisis. One troubling crisis arose in 1793, when war broke out between England and France. Suddenly, America was called upon to choose sides. But Washington chose neutrality. It was a decision that would come to haunt his successors. On the domestic front, however, Washington faced crisis head-on.
One defining moment of the Washington presidency happens in his second term, and it's the Whiskey Rebellion.
In 1794, Pennsylvania farmers were up in arms over a federal excise tax on liquor. They even dusted off an old battle cry: "No taxation without representation."
Washington's point of view was, wait a second, in 1776, we were rebelling against taxes that had been passed in London by the King and Parliament. But these taxes now, in 1794, these are passed in Philadelphia. That's the law of the land. You have to pay them.
As the nation's first commander-in-chief, Washington personally mustered 12,000 volunteers to march to Pennsylvania. This show of force was all it took to put down the rebellion.
Washington understood very clearly that everything he did as the first president of the United States would be watched by nations abroad and by people at home and would set a precedent.
Well, the main precedent, the one that he's known the most for, is that he left.
He decides at the end of his second term that he wants to step down. Partly, I think he's feeling the approach of age. He's in his mid-60s. I think he also wants to teach the country a lesson in the passing on of power.
And you wonder, for example, if somebody like Richard Nixon, say, had been our first president, would Nixon have stepped down?
Grace is a knowing when to leave. Washington left after 2 terms. I think that was his finest moment. In 1798, George Washington produced 11,000 gallons of whiskey at Mount Vernon, making him the single largest distiller of alcohol in America.